Welcome everybody to Carson Saint Fortuna released. This is hosted by Sam Kline, and today we're going to walk through all of the new features, benefits, and capabilities from this new release that you all can take advantage of and apply to your organization. So I'll get into what we'll talk about today. To the agenda. So we want to introduce a new feature, the EPSS, the Exploit Prediction Scoring System. Then we'll get into new PCI ASV Workflow Features, some easier customer management features, new feature sets, and a couple other things that we want to show you guys. So without further ado, I think we'll hand it over to Sam, and he'll walk you through all the new features of this release.
Okay. Thanks, Quinn. So first of all, let me start with the exploit prediction scoring system. So this is also referred to as EPSS. So what this is it's a machine learning model which assigns every CVE in the National Vulnerability Database to a score between 0 and 1, which is expected to show the probability that an exploit will be developed for a given vulnerability. And this is hosted by the FIRST organization. So Saint uses that data in its analytics and reports now to give you a way of prioritizing vulnerabilities based on the probability that an exploit will be developed for the vulnerability. And I'll show you what that looks like in the demo.
Also, if you guys get questions throughout any point in this, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll keep an eye on them, and we'll get to them at the end.
Okay. Also in this Saint Fortuna release, we have some new PCI ASV workflows. And one of those is automatic approval of attestation requests when possible. So as allowed by the program ASV program guide, you're allowed to automatically approve some percentage of your ASV attestation request as long as you set aside some of them for manual review. So in Saint Fortuna, you'll be able to do this. Also, we now reference previous occurrences of a current dispute. So if you tend to get the same disputes every quarter from the same customers, now it'll be easy to go ahead and reference the previous occurrences of that dispute so that you can see if the evidence is the same and then maybe use the same response. And a feature which might be of interest to managed service providers is our new customer management feature in Saint Fortuna. So when this feature is enabled, you'll see a new drop-down menu on every page, like the one on the right here. And that'll allow you to choose a customer to manage. And once you're managing that customer, then you'll only see the objects belonging to that customer, and anything you create will be visible to that customer. And I'll get into that a little bit more during the live demo. Another new feature which may be of interest to managed service providers is feature sets. So what this does is it allows you to choose which features are available to which users. And what that does is it simplifies the customer experience by hiding unused features. So for a user, for example, for an ASV customer who only needs to be able to come in, run scans, submit disputes, and submit a report for attestation, you don't necessarily want that user to be seeing hundreds of different features and hundreds of different menu options across the top. That may make it more difficult for the user to use the product. So with feature sets, you can choose exactly which features each user is going to see and each group is going to see. And a few other new features. I'm not going to read off all of them because they're in the release notes, but just a few that I wanted to point out. One of them is bulk asset tag assignment to future assets. So whereas previously every time you added an asset tag to an asset, you kind of had to do that only for existing assets, and then you would have to add them to new assets as they were discovered. Well, now you can create a rule to assign a certain asset tag to future assets as well as they're discovered in future scans. Some other features that I wanted to point out is the CVSS for PCI column option in the analytics grids. So if you're familiar with the ASV program guide, you probably know that earlier at the beginning of this year, there was a change. Previously, CVSS v2 was used for compliance. Now it may be either CVSS v2 or v3, depending on which one is defined in the National Vulnerability Database. So what that means is for each vulnerability, the vulnerabilities can change. Some vulnerabilities may use CVSS v2 to determine compliance. Some may use CVSS v3. So Saint now gives you a new column option that shows you which CVSS score is used to determine compliance for each vulnerability. And another new feature in Fortuna is drill down capability for all data points in the dashboard. This always existed for some dashboard panels, but not others. Now every dashboard panel, so every bar, every pie wedge, every data point on the dashboard, you can click on to get more details about that data point. And another interesting new option is the option to send scan notifications to the job owner instead of a fixed email address. So if you wanted to set up your managers so that every time a scan finished, it would send an email notification to that job's owner. There was no way to do that globally. You would have to put the email address into every job. Now it's easy. You can go into the global system options and just tell it to send an email notification to the job owner. And then every job that finishes, the notification will go to that owner. And that brings me to the live demo. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So let me go to the Analyze page first. So here's your first look at St. Fortuna, which was released today. And this part hasn't changed a whole lot, but one thing that's new is that you can choose columns. And here we have EPSS. Down here, third from the bottom. So I add that column, click OK. And what we see here is we now have an EPSS score. Actually, I'm going to move that more towards the beginning to make sure it's visible on everyone's screen. Okay, so we can see here now, I made it the fourth column over. So we now have an EPSS score for every vulnerability which exists in the National Vulnerability Database. And this is a number between 0 and 1, where 1 meaning 100% probability, 0 means 0% remediation. So you can click on this column to sort by the column. And once we've sorted by the column in descending order, we see that we get the highest first. So this first vulnerability has a 95% chance of an exploit being developed. The next one has an 88% chance. And then there's a pretty steep drop off down to 19% for the third vulnerability. So if you're going to be prioritizing your remediation based on this score, then the top two are probably the two that you would want to focus on first, as those two are the most likely to be exploited. You can also filter your grids based on this field. So if I put in, for example, 0.9 into the filter bar for this column, then it'll just show us the one vulnerability which has a probability over 90%. Besides the analytics grids, we also have some EPSS data in our dashboards. So this top center panel, total vulnerabilities by exploitability, This panel is not new. This panel existed before, but there is now an additional bar here, which is exploit likely, which means EPSS score above 50%. And by mousing over this bar, we see that there are two vulnerabilities which match this. If I click on it, it drills down and shows us which two vulnerabilities. And it's the two that we saw before, the one with 95% and the one with 88%. So those are the ones which we consider to be likely for an exploit to be developed. We also have some new dashboard panels over here. So for example, total hosts by highest EPSS, if I click on that, then it gives us a graph of the vulnerabilities with the highest EPSS scores and the number of hosts which are affected by each of those vulnerabilities. So it starts off with the highest, which is the Microsoft Telnet, which has a 95% chance, followed by the ICMP timestamps, which are an 88% chance of an exploit being developed, and then it drops off pretty significantly after that. And for each of these vulnerabilities, it tells us there is one host which is affected by that vulnerability. And if we click on the bar, it'll tell us which host was affected. It's 10.7.2.10, the private IP address. Other things we can do with EPSS scores is there is a new detail chart, which is CVSS v3 7 to 10 and EPSS greater than 50%. So what this detail grid does is it's combining two different scores to give you the ones that you might want to consider the top priority. And in this case, in this scan, there was only one vulnerability which met both of those criteria, that had a CVSS v3 of higher critical and an EPSS score over 50%, and that's the Microsoft Telnet. So moving on to some customer management features. So over here under the Manager tab, there's this new checkbox here, Customer Management. What this does is if you check it, it's going to add a new drop-down widget to every page. So I'm going to check that. I'm going to save. And then I'm going to go back out to my scan jobs. And what's new here is this drop-down up here, Manage Customer. So what this does is it gives you a menu of all of your users or groups. That's what we consider to be customers. And we can choose which one to manage. So I'm going to choose to manage myself, Sam Kline. Now you'll notice right now there are about 10 jobs shown. Once I choose to manage Sam Kline, then it only shows me Sam Kline's jobs. And there are only two of them, number 11 and 10. And this is system-wide. It's not just on the jobs grid. So if I then go to the reports, then this widget tells us we're still managing Sam Kline, and it's only showing us the reports belonging to Sam Kline. If I were to create a new report right now, then, well, I would have to select the data set first. For example, here. If I create a new report, then this report is now visible to Sam Kline because I'm managing Sam Kline. When I'm done managing Sam Kline, I can just choose a different user or group, or I can click on Reset, which goes back to the default mode, which is to show me everything. I'm still logged in as admin, but I'm no longer managing a customer. So we see all of the objects in the system this way. And this is just a way of making it easier if you're a managed service provider who's managing a number of different customers, that you can just choose which one to manage, and you're given a filtered view of just the objects belonging to that particular customer. Another feature which might be helpful for managed service providers would be the user features. So what this does, I'll demonstrate this by editing a group. So we have this group called Group 1 here. I'm going to edit this group. And this screen brings up the group edit dialog. And there's a new tab over here called Features all the way on the right. If I click this, it'll allow us to choose a feature set for this group. So by default, there are no restrictions, which means that the group will have access to all features in the system. But I can choose other feature sets as well. So I can choose a custom feature set or one of the built-in ones, such as common features or reporting only, or ASV customer. If I'm running my ASV service through Saint Manager, I might want to create a group that's an ASV customer group. So I'm going to choose the ASV customer group. And then we can expand these different sections to see which features are enabled in the ASV customer feature set. So if I expand menu, this shows us that my menus will include scan jobs, schedules, all results, disputes, PCI identities, reports. If I were to expand the wizard steps, it would see that the only wizard steps I get for creating a job would be to choose the scan targets and the job schedule. So that kind of gives you an idea of what a feature set is. Let's see it in action. So I'm going to click on Save here. I'm now going to become user Kline, which is one of the users in that group. And now we can see that we're logged in as Kline. I became the user Kline, and we see fewer menu options across the top. So instead of seeing 6 or 7 different things across the top and a whole bunch of different options under each, we now have a much simplified using experience. So here we only see what an ASV customer would actually need: the ability to create jobs, the ability to check your schedule, the ability to view results, and the ability to create reports and PCI identities. And this is all customizable. So if you want to give your users a few more features, you can create your own custom feature sets. But as long as I'm user Kline, I'm only going to see a few different things. I'm only going to see these menu options. And if I go to create a scan job, then I'm only going to see these 3 basic steps instead of the usual 5-step process that an administrator would see. And when I'm choosing my scan policy, I only have this one option here, the PCI external, because that's the only scan policy which has been enabled in this feature set. So that just makes it a lot easier to control which features your users are seeing and to simplify the user experience by only giving them access to the features they need. I'm going to log out here and then log back in as admin to continue the demo. So another feature I wanted to show you is asset tag assignments. So we've always had bulk asset tag assignments. This isn't new. So I might create, for example, an asset tag location Bethesda for this asset. And that's fine. But what's new here is this checkbox, assigned to newly discovered assets. So if I check this checkbox, that means that I'm not just assigning this asset tag to existing assets, but I'm assigning this asset tag to assets which are discovered in future scans. And then I have to edit some criteria here. So I'm just going to say 10700/24. So any IP address which begins with 1070 will now automatically be assigned this asset tag location Bethesda. So I'm going to save. It tells us that our tag is saved, so that's good. If I want to go back and see what future asset tag assignments I've made, I click on this link here. And this gives us a grid of all of our future asset tag assignments. So this is telling us, as we just created, any future asset whose IP address starts with 10.7.0 will be assigned the asset tag location Bethesda. And that'll be automatic. So we no longer need to go through all of our assets and assign tags manually after the scan finishes. We can just set it up to be applied automatically to future assets. One last feature I wanted to demonstrate was the for disputes. So when you do ASV workflows through the manager, you're going to get disputes submitted by your ASV customer, and then you have to look at the evidence or maybe do manual testing and then decide whether or not you want to approve the dispute and allow it to pass, allow the vulnerability to pass, or whether you want to deny the dispute and tell the customer they need to fix the vulnerability so it doesn't show up again. So here in this system, we have two disputes, and I'm going to look at the second one here, the one which is currently open, which is vulnerable FreeBSD kernel version. So I'm going to open up that dispute. And here we see that the customer has claimed that this is a false positive. So, all right, we can look at the evidence and all. They haven't uploaded an evidence file yet. And then as the ASV, it's up to us to respond to it. And we can choose to either approve or deny it or request more information. But what's new is this bottom section here, other occurrences of this dispute. So what we see here is this dispute has been submitted before and has been approved in the past. And it gives you the date of the previous dispute and the status, so we can see that it was submitted recently and it was approved. So that gives us something a little more to go on. So that can save some time knowing that we've already seen this dispute in the past and we've already approved it. So what you can do here is you can click on the view button to see the previous occurrence of this dispute. So you can see what was entered before. You can see what our response was. We told the customer before the screenshot indicates a patch has been applied. You can also look through the vulnerability information, and you can see all the details about the vulnerability finding. And then if you decide after reviewing the dispute and the new evidence and the previous dispute that you want to use the same response, then it's a one-click process. You just click on copy response. The response from the previous dispute gets copied into the new one, and then you just click on update and you're done. So that's a convenience feature there. If your ASV staff is processing tens or hundreds of disputes per day, then that can be a time saver there. So that's about it for what I wanted to demo. Quinn, I guess it's back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. Here we are, and I think we're going to take this to questions. And I did see we got two in there while Sam was doing his demo, so I'll start with those. If anyone has any more questions they want to ask us while we're here, feel free to send them in the chat, and we'll definitely get to them. So this first one's from Rob Coate. He says, what resource is providing the EPSS scoring? In other words, is it a third-party integration?
Okay, so the answer to that is yes, it's a third-party integration. The EPSS scores are created by the first organization, and so we're using their data feed to import the scores into the same engine.
Awesome. And then this next one is from Eric Hill. He asks, is EPSS part of pen testing too? Can EPSS data be pulled with an API?
So at this time, the EPSS scores are only available from the API if you generate a report. So if you're using the reporting API call, then you can enable the EPSS column. But if you use just the get scan results API call, then it's not in there yet. And as for penetration testing, it's generally considered more useful for vulnerability scanning. So I can't remember if the column is enabled for the analytics for pen testing. But one way to look at it is for pen testing, if an exploit succeeds, then that pretty much tells you that the exploit's available, regardless of the EPSS score. So yeah, the column may be available for pen test analytics, but once a vulnerability has been exploited, or once an exploit exists in the system, then that pretty much tells you that the exploit's available.
Awesome. Well, If anyone has more questions, I'll give it another minute. You can submit that if you'd like. But other than that, this is our contact information, phone, email, and website. As for the information on the actual release, be on the lookout for an email with the recording of this so you can, start, stop, and skip ahead all you like for all the new features and the live demo and all of that. And then we'll be releasing the release notes in a blog too. So I'll be including that in the email to you. And so just be out on the lookout for me in your inbox, and you should find all the information there. So it looks like we got another question though before we end, and he asks, when will EPSS be available in the scan results API?
Okay, so I don't have a specific date yet, but I will create a development ticket for that.
Awesome. Well, if no one has any more questions, I think we'll end it there, and I'll get to sending this recording and all the release notes to you all, so you all can take it and use it on your own for your organization. So thank you everyone for coming. This is a lot of fun, and excited to see you again.